You're listening to the Mind Your Business podcast. We've all heard the phrase, practice makes perfect. But in reality, it's perfect practice that makes progress. Today's special guest will show you how to improve or enhance any skill imaginable with a better strategy for practice.
So stay tuned.
Hi, I'm James Wedmore, and with 13 years online, I've built my business to over $9 million in sales per year. And this is the first non-business business podcast that shows you how to apply the principles of spirituality, energy, and mindset to create true and lasting success, all from the inside out. This is the Mind Your Business podcast. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm James Wedmore.
And I'm Jenny Finley.
I got to tell you, Jen, one of the most fascinating episodes that we've ever recorded in over 600 total episodes.
Wow.
How about that?
High praise.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because we've been doing this a long time. I've interviewed so many incredible guests. This goes down as one of the most fascinating episodes.
What made it particularly interesting?
So I've been personally interested about the topic that Laido, our guest, Laido Dittmar, is speaking on. And he has, I would say, over 20 years of experience in this topic. And that is the skill of practicing, the art of practicing, the science of practicing. Let me tell you a little bit about Laido. He's a Hungarian born into a circus family.
Born into a circus family?
Yes, he's like a circus family.
Wow, like Robin?
Just like Batman and Robin.
Just like Robin.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Dick Grayson, is that his name? What's Robin's real name?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Nerd alert over here. So he is an internationally awarded performer, drawing on 2 decades of expertise as a circus artist, and has worked and been a part of companies like Cirque du Soleil, which is really
Might have heard of them. I mean,
I've heard of Cirque du
they're a
Soleil.
little independent organization.
By the way, the Michael Jackson Michael?
Yes, one. Yes, you told me it's amazing.
Is that what it's called?
I think it's called that.
But that in Vegas, I mean, that was incredible. So there's a world famous circus in Sarasota, Florida. Said he's quite possibly one of the greatest jugglers you'll ever see in your life.
Wow.
Yeah. Here's what also is really cool about Laido is his mission today is now he inspires a whole new generation of artists. I look at all of us as artists as well, passing on his knowledge. He's the author of a book called The Art of Practice. Same effort, twice the progress, any skill.
Love it.
And that's what we really dive into. It's a phenomenal book. Read the book, love the episode. He's just scratching the surface of so many different tools, but I think he gave the 20% that makes the difference, and real simple stuff that we can just just how we can approach any skill and improving that skill.
Simple means you'll apply it.
Exactly. Here's another fun fact. He's got personal and world records, include being one of 4 jugglers who's ever flashed, I don't know what that means, 10 rings while balancing a ring on his head, and being the second juggler in the world to flash 7 rings back crosses, according to Juggling Wikipedia. I don't know. So
super amazing, phenomenal juggling is what I took away from that.
Yes.
Very
no,
impressive.
It's like one of the best
jaw-dropping,
wow,
juggling.
But his whole story in the first 20 minutes is his story. He was awful at it, and he was a very late bloomer with juggling.
Yes.
And the book really dives into that about he started way too late to you're supposed to start in a circus family at 6. He didn't start till he was 17 or 18.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, you're just not going to make it. What are you doing? You can't make mistakes in juggling, It wasn't progressing. He was practicing 12 hours a day and wasn't seeing progress. Wow. Can you imagine Could you imagine me practicing the guitar 12 hours a day? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be here anymore, would you?
Oh, not true. I would just buy
a separate
earmuffs.
house. I thought you were going to say, I just buy a separate house. Yeah. And he wasn't seeing the progress. And so it sent him on this journey to figure out what separates the person that you see as a natural versus someone that wasn't.
I love that. It's
so fascinating. So I'm really passionate about this topic. I love learning. I love growing. I love applying new skills. As you know, as you love this about me, I started practicing the guitar started to learn how to play the guitar, your favorite thing about me, about 1.5 years ago at this point. And I really fell in love with it. You know, people are like, oh, you want to become like a famous musician or something? It's like, not at all. That's not a dream for me. But I really love and geek out learning new things, growing, seeing myself expand. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are that way. And I quickly started to see the parallels, the correlation between learning a new skill in guitar versus looking back at the skills that are absolutely required for business. And I try to shout this as loudly as I can to as many people as possible. When we get into our self-pity of, I'm no good, I'm not cut out for this, and no one likes me, and my business sucks. You've kind of like, that's like a guitarist playing for 30 days and then wondering why they don't have like a Taylor Swift album, right? And the basic fact is there are skills required that are a prerequisite for success in your business. They're skills. And what that means is that for most people, you're going to suck at those skills if you've never practiced them before.
Right.
And then over time, through the right type of practice, you're going to get better at those skills. And when you get better at those skills, you get results. And he, even in his book, he talks about this timeline. He kind of mentions it in the interview that like the first, I kind of forget, it's like the first 2 years is like awkward.
Yes.
For most people.
Yes.
And then it's about 4 years that you start to like get really damn good.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting phenomenon. Most people I've seen in business, this is, if someone hears this the right way, what I'm about to say could change their life. Really. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic sense. He says it's about 4 years when people get good. And I see this time and time again. You talk to a business owner that's been doing this consistently for 4 years, and it's at that 3 to 4 mark where things really start to pop for them.
Yeah.
I don't think that's quinky dinky. I think that is correlated. I think that's when people are figuring out some things. They're getting to a proficient skill level. And it's like, I got this. Then he talks about it's at 10 years where like, it's like forward, backwards, eyes closed mastery kind of deal. And that's where, I mean, I'm not trying to brag. I hope that doesn't sound as bragging. It's like, you do this for 16 years. I'm just a little slower. But 16 years, like I can say that about a lot of things.
Right.
So first off, what are these skills that I'm talking about? I want to ping pong this back and forth. And what do you see? You're so good at what you do, and what you do is what a lot of our listeners do themselves in, you know, marketing, copywriting. What do you see as some of the skills that are required for someone who's running an online business, personal brand, online expert? What's one?
Understanding your customer, what their problems are, what their challenges are, what their desires are.
Yeah.
I think that can be nuanced, and that ties into being able to communicate the way that you solve a particular problem.
Yeah.
And then what is the most complex, highest value, most unique, rare problem that only I can solve? And how do I communicate that?
Well, you've
to them?
said a word a couple times, and that's a key word for me. And I asked Laido the same question in the interview, because, you know, now today he is an online brand. You know, he's a teacher and he's a coach. So he's in our world, you know. He said the same thing, and he said communication. And this is, you know, I think this is a thing that, first of all, like most people suck at communication. I know this because I used to. When did you learn communication? In school? You know, we don't really take a communication class. We really don't, you know, and some of us are fortunate enough to like go through some personal development program or NLP or something, and you leadership class, and you like learn how to have effective conversations. But communication, and who's going out there practicing how to be a better communicator? Sales is a skill. Creating an offer, which you said, is a skill. Team building, skill. Productivity, how to be productive and efficient and effective, and how to delegate and how to outsource. Skills.
Delivering content.
Creating
scopes of work.
Teaching is a skill. Coaching.
Holding people accountable for delivering work.
Absolutely.
Eliciting performances from others.
Skill.
All skills.
And most of us have zero experience in these skills when we get started. And then we're completely baffled why we're not seeing extraordinary results with subpar skill levels. And then we go and internalize it and say, it's me, I suck, I'm the problem, it's me, I'm a loser. And it's like, you know, if I was saying that about me when I first picked up the guitar in the first 30 days, I wouldn't still be playing. And he talks about this both in the book and on the episode about the difference between what we call a natural and someone who's lacking in the skill. And his argument for it is so beautiful. You'll absolutely love it. And and I'll let you, listen into the episode as well. But for me, it's first off, a long-winded answer to your question, of course, a topic I've been very passionate about because I want people to be masters at all of these skills so that they can go make more money and help more people. And so you'll need that. You'll need to do that. It's also just very passionate for me in general to see like, how can we get better at anything we do? And I think that's something that drives me, is I always want to be better for myself. And then there's the end of the episode. And I won't reveal it here, but the episode takes a turn.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. This is like, I'm just going to say that, like, this may not be the episode that you like came here for, but didn't know you need, but like Laido dropped some bombs in this.
Grab some
episode.
popcorn for the end.
This will be probably one of the most intriguing episodes. That
cool.
I personally think so. And
let's play this, baby.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's play that interview with you. And this is The Art of Practice with Laido Dittmar. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here with none other than Laido Dittmar, author of The Art of Practice. Same effort, twice the progress, any skill. Laido, sir, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you, James, again so much for this opportunity. I'm really glad to be here and talking about practice.
Yes. So where are you coming to us from in the world, by the way?
I'm living in Hungary, Budapest, but was a performer since a very long time. And that lifestyle does make you travel a lot and spend less time at home. We will get into it a little bit later, how I kind of changed that lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the book is The Art of Practice. I'm really excited to bring these distinctions in this conversation to our listeners. Can you give us kind of the elevator pitch? What's the book about? What's your big message about?
I'm a Cirque du Soleil performer every now and then. It's, as an artist, you switch shows, you go wherever the next opportunity is. And I'm the creator of what I named the Naturals Method about 10 years or so. And basically, I specialize in helping artists, athletes, and practitioners of any physical skill or sport reliably double their progress speed by adjusting their practice strategy. And this way, they can usually achieve their true potential 2 to 3 times faster, no matter how advanced they are. So this is not just for beginners. So basically, this includes any physical skill like martial arts, golf, tennis, basketball, playing an instrument of all kinds of dancing styles. So students really come from all kinds of corners in skill, even like pickleball, which I had no idea it exists until a student told me he achieved great progress with the strategies in pickleball. So I had to take a look at what pickleball even is. But, well, I'm coming from a Russian-Hungarian circus family. So growing up, I would say I lived the typical life of a circus child, which meant basically that my parents were trying out all kinds of different skills with me to really figure out what it was that I supposed to be the most talented at. And since both of them were acrobats, naturally, they first tried acrobatics with me, which I really was bad at. So no joke, it was bad. So I tried other stuff, of course, hand balancing, all the typical things that you would know and skills you would find in circus. Mm-hmm. But as much as I have tried, or they tried, I didn't really seem to progress the way my parents were hoping I would. There weren't any real signs of talent coming from me, so to speak. And so quite early on, everyone, and even I, believed I wouldn't become a circus artist at all. When I became interested in becoming an artist, contrary to what people usually think, I was already 17, almost 18, which is regarded as quite late. Most professional jugglers who get to do it professionally, at least back in the day, started most often juggling at the age of 6 or so. So to start at 18, all my friends and relatives from circus kind of believed I'm trying the impossible. And almost everyone even tried to convince me that if I want to become an artist, why don't I choose something easier, something that would suit me more, as they would say. And this wasn't an indirect, discreet advice either, because hearing things from others like, you got no talent, you started too late, you should do something easier, those kind of things were the daily regular I would have to take in. It was just one of those things where even if I didn't create excuses for myself, I do believe people delivered me quite a big bunch of them, and quite regularly as well. It was a kind of a common belief in circus that if you didn't develop anything until the age of 16, it's pretty much over, since the competition you will meet is so strong and international that you really won't have much of a chance to achieve anything significant. So in their eyes, I basically set myself up for definitive failure. They were kind of right, because it really didn't work out as well as I thought it would. And it wasn't out of not putting enough time or work in. I remember practicing sometimes 8 hours, 5 times a week without really making, any significant progress. And you have to imagine that this went on for at least a year and a half since I've started, where I really progressed so slowly that you wouldn't even think there's sense in seeing it as something you could do professionally in the future. I did get a little bit better, and I did have some performances where I could kind of test myself, but those were awful. I still remember, man. I still remember at my first performance, I remember dropping and making mistakes like 17 times, which was actually more mistakes than I had tricks. So that's a priceless experience, I tell you. Long story short, was a disaster. Mm-hmm. And even after those awful performances, I've decided to go even more to extreme measures. I started to practice often 9 to 10 hours a day, which didn't help my social skills, but I tried to put that up later on. Yes. Yeah. And at times I even got up to 12, which wasn't something I would recommend anyone to do, but it still happened. Mm-hmm. And what I also decided to do was probably the smartest idea I had at that time, because the only thing I ever did besides practicing was reading. Heard a lot about sports psychology, and you need to remember that this was in a time when all of this stuff was not mainstream at all. Mm-hmm. Like, it was like esoterics, or kind of, you don't see people in those corners in the bookshop. And so I decided to read everything I basically could lay my hands on, and read while eating, traveling. I was listening to courses, lots of Brian Tracy. Mm-hmm. I was really trying to learn everything I could about psychology, success, and achievement. And one of the first things I learned was this basic idea of interviewing. And it wasn't even from a book having anything to do with the topic of practice, actually. I got the idea specifically from Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, as he interviewed the richest people in the world, basically taking their advice. And so I was thinking, how about if I just interview the best artists who already achieved the things I wanted for myself? Like, that idea really made sense to me, if that would work out. So I made it my most important task to, first of all, find them and interview them. And luckily, because of my background, coming from a circus family, I could get access to them actually really easily. Like, every 2 years, there was, and still is, the International Circus Festival of Budapest, where pretty much the best of the best come. And that was always a great opportunity to connect with people who are really at the top of their game. And the thing is, once I met them, I started asking them questions like, what are the specific things that I should do or avoid and be aware in practice? Is there anything they do differently that makes them more successful? Or what are the mistakes they see that others usually make? And in my case, questioning them, it didn't work at all. Like, at all. Because when the time came for them to answer, it often came off as some kind of bad graduation speech, where it's like, well, you have to love what you do, work hard at it. And almost all the advice I've gotten was really so non-specific and intangible, because how should I love more what I do? How should I work harder on it? I believed I kind of already did those two things without getting any significant results. But hearing the same kind of answers over and over again, and I think it was really honest answers. It wasn't like, the little kid asking questions, let's just brush it off. I think they did try to answer me. But after the 10th or 20th time, repeatedly listening to the same kind of answers, which were so similar and unclear and vague, I understood that they couldn't really tell me, even if they really wanted to, simply because they weren't clear about it themselves. Whatever they were doing, they just did it. Mm-hmm. So basically, this idea of interviewing failed. And the funny thing is, when I had that experience, just as it happened, I attended a class for drawing called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. Some people might know that. And it was because actually the only thing I seemed to have really talent at least outside of circus, was drawing. And at that point, I really thought maybe I was wasting all my time to become good at something I wasn't supposed to be talented at, while the thing I was actually talented at was going to waste. That's when I saw an advertisement for this class for drawing. Basically, it's a class where they teach anyone to draw not only decently, but actually really amazing drawings, and all that progress within 1 or 2 days. And so I decided to go there. And when the class started, I was surprised for a couple of reasons. And it was because the principles they were teaching in drawing were most of the time things I was already doing. And I remember thinking, how can that be if I had never been taught how to draw before? Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, I also assumed everybody would naturally go about drawing the way I did, but they didn't. So the basic principles that for me personally never came to my mind were new to everyone else, but I was applying them without ever being taught. So once we did our first drawing, which is made in the class more as a comparison, so you can compare how much you evolved during class. And so you make one before you learned the techniques and one after. And so when we did the first drawing, the instructor came up to me, and because my drawing was already decent, she asked me, did I ever attend this class before? And of course, I told her that it's my first time attending, and she kind of looked at me for a moment and said something that really shifted my entire perspective, because she said, in that case, you might be a naturally talented person. And I remember as she said that, something kind of clicked for me, because it was the moment when I kind of understood why maybe all the greats I talked to couldn't tell me exactly what they did differently. And it's simply because it's possible to do the right principles without ever being conscious to them. And I believed that the same way I didn't know anything about what I didn't recognize I was doing right in drawing, they didn't know exactly what they were doing, but it must have been practice principles that each of those naturals did. Because when I started out, I actually started off very poorly when I began to draw. But I had the natural attributes to get better, without the need to learn or be shown how to approach it. And I was convinced that the same way I found there were right principles I did in drawing, that I didn't recognize doing, there must have been practice principles that naturals did, that they didn't recognize, but what probably each of them did. Once that clicked for me, I went back to the pros, but this time I stopped asking them, and instead I started to observe them, trying to search for the details and commonalities between them. And every time I got the chance to practice with a pro, which was a lot of chances, I just took a step back and tried to find those things that were different to how I would go about doing them, modeling like the little things they were doing that the majority maybe never did, or did in an opposite way because they didn't seem important or went even unnoticed. And I started to take notes on what they started and finished with in practice, which kind of tricks or kind of skills they chose to practice, anything I could really think of. But mostly I watched for things that were different. And this research somehow naturally expanded because I started taking notes not only about naturals, but I also started to take notes about the non-naturals like me, the ones who achieve kind of the mediocre or no success at all. Mm-hmm. And I started realizing how these mistakes were present almost anywhere I looked. It wasn't a genre thing. It was like pretty much universal. And as I was doing that, I, of course, started naturally to look at every kind of artist, not just jugglers. I looked at the ones who achieved the most and the least and observed how they did it. And I started to see how these seemingly subtle differences each person makes in practice, no matter their field, how those things were very universal and had really an enormous impact on their progress. It's just as true for musicians as for athletes, dancers, basketball players, acrobats, you name it. Basically anything that really requires fine or gross motor skills and would require practice. Since the mistakes are the same and the solutions to those mistakes are the same as well. And what you can find out through observing them is that naturals really think alike. They have very common behaviors, no matter what field they work in, but it takes some knowledge from both sides to really uncover the map of what they are doing. Because no natural was ever usually a non-natural, and mainly that's the reason why they can't explain it or even know about it. They can't really associate themselves with us. They can explain probably bad technical movements, like the very structural technical part, but they can't explain the strategies internally or the attitudes, because the right thinking and actions came to them naturally and instinctively. They were often either born with it or they were growing up in an environment that instilled the right methods and thinking into them unconsciously. So it became second nature to them. And if you come to them with questions, they will know how to handle the external part. But it's the inner part which seems obvious for them. So they naturally assume that it is for you as well.
So fascinating. Yes.
It was a trip. I won't lie. It was a trip. Yeah. And what I've discovered when you observe masters in any field, you will find that they often do things that are very counterintuitive. And counterintuitive means doing the things that seems like the right thing to do isn't the thing that usually makes it really work. Doing the thing that doesn't seem to work is often kind of like a hidden road you need to take to succeed. Mm-hmm. And if you look at 80% of what naturals do, usually you can say, yeah, I get that. I understand that because it's really intuitive. It just makes sense. And you can make sense of that because it's the logical and the obvious thing to do. But it's the other 20% that's counterintuitive. And that counterintuitive stuff, like often one little shift, like one simple change, sometimes that's all it takes. And those magical shifts can only be found in doing the 20% of those critical counterintuitive things. When you look at the things they do differently, that gets them actually the results. When you first see it, it almost doesn't make sense. You probably wouldn't even see it as anything special. But that's also the reason why you would never really come up with doing things that way in the first place. So as I started to practice that way, and I try to make, a long story short because it wasn't this simple as I tell it, but let's keep it simple. As I started to practice that way, the way I perceive naturals were practicing, I was able to establish like a simplified set of rules and ways for myself and for my practice. And I started to notice how my progress, and I mean literally almost on the same day, and this is something that all my students also say, that this stuff works on the first day. And as things started to progress each day, not only, like every month or so, the way it usually happens, which is a way that is completely unpredictable. And I recognized that anytime I would stop progressing, I could go through the rules and realize I didn't do one of them, simply because it wasn't natural to me. So I think by this point it is. It did become second nature, but I had to regularly watch for those rules to keep them active. I needed to remind myself over and over, but as long as I followed them, it almost kept me in a field where I felt as if I am literally forced to progress. And for me, that was like magic.
Wow. So obviously I want to get into some of these simplified rules.
Yes, yes, of course.
But I want to, I'm curious, like, what's the happily ever after for you in this story? If you were a mediocre juggler, what was the conclusion of this for you with your juggling skills specifically?
Well, as I tell it in the book, the story continues. The book ends at a certain point, but the story did continue after. Mm-hmm. And this is serious topic that I will get into towards the end, if that's all right with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
If people stick to this podcast and listen to the end, I do want to speak about stuff that is very, very close to my heart. Mm-hmm. I do believe I did get the happy end, but by the time I reached it, it had a completely different meaning, and just the road expanded to something very, very different, where the happy end is not really about me anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a perfect transition to share one of the techniques.
Please, absolutely.
All right. So the first thing I realized, I think early on, is that people, when they start out practicing a skill, usually at the very beginning of the process, they tend to progress quite rapidly, as we talked about. But after getting some initial progress and achieving some results, once there's a certain progress level that has been achieved, the progress kind of starts to slow down gradually. And I always wondered why that is. And is this something that happens for everyone? And many people believe that it's the normal tendency of progressing to slow down. As you get better at a skill, it gets harder. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. As said, people think just because something got harder, it's reason enough for the progress to slow down. But actually, the level of difficulty is very relative. For example, for someone who is, let's say, used to lift 40 pounds, lifting 45 will be easier than for someone who never lifted trying to lift 30. So it's always relative to someone's current skill level. And if we think about the fundamental question, why progress itself happens, and what is the fundamental reason that causes us to progress, then we will arrive to the answer that it's nothing else than our body and mind trying to adapt to the stress we are putting it through. And usually the very first thing that people get wrong when aiming for progress in practice is that they think it's a process of rehearsal and not a process of adaptation. But adaptation is basically how even our muscles grow, by the way of trying to adapt to the stress we put it through. And that's actually how our skills advance as well. And the actual mistake that happens, however, almost on a universal level, is that people stop doing what essentially worked for them at the very beginning, when they just started out practicing a skill. Whenever we are just starting out learning a skill from zero, what happens is we are immediately pushing our limits to the maximum amount. And as our skill is pushed, our system, based on the reasonable stress, tries everything to adapt to that stress. And so as a result, we progress. And it's the reason why progress at the beginning stages tends to happen rapidly and predictably, because we push ourselves almost continually at the very beginning of a skill. And so if we think about why does our progress seem to slow down with time as we usually get better? Usually when we first start practicing, let's say, trick, move, or skill, what anyone can observe is that the first 90%, 85-90% of learning a move goes very rapidly. It's usually the last 10% of learning a skill that creates trouble for us to make it really consistent, and which can often take up to 3 or 4 more times more to learn than the initial 90% took. Why does that happen? And the answer is really simple. we said that progress only happens because our internal system tries to adapt to the stress we are putting it through. And so when we just first started out practicing something, there was a lot of stress and it pushed us a lot. But once we kind of get better and better at the skill and we become more comfortable with it, where we basically learn 90% of it, gradually, as we become better at it, it doesn't push us as much anymore towards the end. So the mistake people often make is believing I better first master this level before I move on to something more advanced.
Right.
But actually, if we want to continue progressing, in that case, we should switch to something more difficult as soon as we start to become too comfortable with the things we try to improve in. And I mean too comfortable. Yeah, you reach 90% of a skill. You struggle to make it consistent, but that's the time when you should move further to something more difficult and aim for the 90% in that and switch to something that still pushes us and activates this adaptation. You are practicing guitar, right?
Correct.
A great example is a guy I heard about called Sean Lane.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard about him.
Only from your book. Yeah.
It's so interesting because a lot of people, guitar students, tell me that. And I think I was just lucky finding him. Now, the way I heard about him was at a point when I was interested about learning to play guitar until I realized that I don't have the capacity to learn another skill.
Busy man.
You know, it's a lot of things, especially if you take performing next to it. It's, you know how it is, having a coaching business.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I knew nothing about how to play a guitar, and I still don't, actually. But while doing research, what I often like to do is find the very best, whoever was in the area, when it comes to the technique. So when I was searching around for who the best guitar player is, technically, at least, this guy's name kept popping up called Sean Lane. This was ages ago, and it was just, you know, these weird forums. So this is not recent stuff. Who obviously wasn't as famous as he should have been. But the things that I've heard about this guy is that if you try to play guitar and you watch him play, it's literally impossible how fast he can play.
Oh.
And it's not like a little more impossible than anybody else who plays guitar. It's like everybody else at the top who plays guitar on a level that is so complex that it's technically impossible. And then there's like Sean Lane.
Wow.
And between them is this giant gap. Depending on what your taste is, he might not have been writing the best music or the most popular music, but he was technically perfect in playing it. And in one of the interviews I found, someone asked him, how do you build up the speed? How do you learn to play that insanely fast? And he answered, I do something that is not the way most people teach to do it. And he said, what I do is I play the scale and the guitar lick faster than I can play it. I try to play it faster than I can play it, and I screw up as I try to do it that way. But I keep playing it faster than I can play it, and I try to adapt myself to the speed. Once I move a slight degree back from my limits and coming back from that point, the speed doesn't even seem as hard anymore. So rather than how anybody else who teaches it, that is to do it slow and build up the difficulty step by step and go only a little bit faster and a little bit faster and master that level before ever moving on, the important thing is learning kind of the basics right, because you can mess it up. So the basics always have to be right, and those have to be learned properly. But as soon as you have the basics kind of done, train on your limits. Yeah. Try to adapt yourself to the stress rather than going it slowly, one step at a time. It doesn't mean you have to overdo it, not, kind of rip your arm off, but doing slightly more than your current limits. And like the most simple cliche answer is get yourself out of your comfort zone regularly. But
it's so fascinating too, Laido, because every guitar instructor I've had, every YouTube video, everything has said, do that fast song or that lick as slow as possible first.
Yeah.
And it's do it slow will get you faster. And from reading the book and hearing this is like, it really truly is in that world of learning, the counterintuitive approach. But it does, the more you think about it, it does make so much sense. It's like if you tried to do a pull-up with like carrying 20 pounds, in your legs, like holding on to an extra 20 pounds. Then you drop the weight and all of a sudden it's easier to do your pull-ups. To me, it feels like the exact same thing, and it makes so much sense.
Yes, it's just obvious knowledge. And I tell you what the crazy thing is. I talk to so many athletes in different sports, and the problem is, even if they would have wanted to go to the next level, it's the coaches who were stopping them.
Wow.
So imagine the implication of that, how this common knowledge simply stopping progress by the coaches who were supposed to make you better. And I was shocked. I was shocked to hear that, because I just assumed that more people know about this. And I had this idea for at least like 15 years now, and I didn't bring out the book, and I was always thinking that somebody will be faster than me. I will not mention names, but in the guitar space, once the book was out, it went as wildfire. Like in recent times, I can see that people have copied some of the things, not all of the things. And well, thank God, they didn't copy it in a way as good because they did copy it, but not using the same kind of language. These are not ideas I inherited or got, especially what's inside in terms of strategy. It's all original. I came up with it. Of course, I researched. Of course, I went through tons of books and everything, but I didn't really find the thing that I needed. And people often think, how does a juggler come into this? Like, why juggling? And I can tell you why. Because first of all, there are not many skills that are really physical, and you can do it for 10 hours a day. So my time of putting in effort and experience of seeing feedback, getting all the time feedback. And that's the second thing, that juggling is such a micro movement skill. The smallest mistakes, the mistake of a centimeter, you fail. You get instant feedback. And there are no limits. It's not like a sport like ice skating, or where there are certain type of set of tricks you can learn, and you are moving within those limits. Juggling has no end. You can always be better. There are always more things that you could learn. It's infinite in options and infinite in difficulty. And if you put in that much time, and you are also an open person who is always testing different strategies all the time, which I try to do, then the amount of feedback will compound, and you wind up writing a book, I guess.
Yeah, I love it.
I wrote this book for 6 years, and there is a course. So everything together, it took me 6 years. So it wasn't something that I just, put together on a whim. It was like 10 years of experience, and then 6 years to try to distill it in a compact format where you would actually get more out of going through the program than if you would have me live there. That was at least my goal. Of course, you can reach out if you have troubles, but I receive very little questions from people about how to process the information and put it into their own skill, because I really tried to make it as universal, as clear, as compact as possible. And I do believe it worked.
I want to, that's wonderful. I want to take a little detour down here for just a moment, if you can humor me, because you now today come to be someone that is the same type of person that is a listener to this show.
Yeah.
So here you are, owning a business, being a coach, creating content, having a book, having a program. I don't want to lead the witness here too much, but I'm assuming that in this process of assimilating and distilling it and then putting it out there, you've had to learn some new skills.
Oh, yes.
I'm assuming too that you've applied your own methodology to this. What would you say are the top skills that you've had to learn in order to get this work out to the world?
Well, obviously, marketing was number one.
Mm-hmm.
And communication was the second, because communication is probably the number one skill in today's age. If next to anything else, first of all, you need to have the quality of what you communicate. So there needs to be wisdom, needs to be knowledge behind it. But once you have the experience that is worth to communicate, a lot depends on communication.
Yeah.
And I still haven't started. So if people come to my Instagram, they won't see any shorts. They won't see, because I'm still busy with making everything else in the marketing field, like perfecting the website, perfecting the communication on the website, perfecting my course. I still have so many ideas I need to put into the course. Not that it's not ready already. It is. It's a complete format, but there's so much more on the internal side, so much more about the psychology behind how you identify as, because that's a big part of it. Wow. How do you occur to yourself? And that's a very big part, because the common tendency in making these courses is like, okay, we start with the mindset, and there's barely any real world strategy. Not that mindset is not important. I tell you, it's maybe the most important. For instance, what I've recognized, a lot of people are very humble, and they have a trouble of identifying as that I am the best. You need to believe you are the best. Mm-hmm. You need to have the confidence. You are in a performance. If I go out and I start doubting myself, I don't believe that ego is a bad thing. I do believe that it's a tool until you are in this physical world. Mm-hmm. You need to have an ego to operate in this world, and that ego needs to have a lot of confidence. It needs to be having a belief that can, move mountains. It needs to be strong, and you need to, of course, justify it with real world action and results. It doesn't mean you are not humble.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we got here.
No, I know. I sent you on a beautiful detour, and that was some great distinctions. And you're so right. And I think our listeners will resonate a lot with that. Of there's a difference between you can be humble and confident. You can be humble and be in your power. And I think the way I describe humbleness is you don't, just because you're really great at something or you've mastered something doesn't make you better than somebody else. It doesn't put you on a pedestal where you get to look down and you have more value or you have superiority. Anybody who would put in that time and practice the right way could produce similar level of skills that you have. And you just chose through dedicating or sacrificing your time to do that. But that doesn't make you any better. So people do. I think that was just such a huge, great point, is that I used to struggle with that you think that being humble means that, who am I to be doing this? Or I can't say I'm the best.
Exactly. You need to have the belief. It's so simple. At the same time, it's so complex. You need to have the belief, because it will take a lot of struggle, a lot of sacrifice. And any person who doesn't believe that they can actually do it and win in the end, you won't be able to do it. You won't be able to sacrifice all the time that you have with your loved ones could have, but instead you are struggling here and trying to make something happen that has objectively and statistically a very little chance to happen, but you are still going for it. And you cannot become a champion without believing you are a champion.
Amen. Well, and as you started the journey of turning this all into your own business, I couldn't agree more, by the way, that communication is hands down the number one skill required in any type of business. I don't think people give enough credence to that. I think that is, in 16 years of doing this, I could not agree more. It's everything, whether it's Instagram, your marketing, sales, your podcast, speaking at an event, writing a book, teaching it all comes down to communication.
So exactly.
Did you see that as a new skill to apply this while you were starting this business journey yourself, where you're like, wow, this is a skill and I need to practice it? Was that something that was a blind spot for you?
Oh, definitely. As I said, I would say I sacrificed all my 20s towards making my skill better. And as said, the scale was completely out of balance because I wasn't a very social person. Take into account that I am an INTJ. I'm supposed to be a very introvert person, and everything I do now is not according to my type. It doesn't come naturally to me.
Right.
But through the lifestyle, because of all the traveling, I meet a higher amount of people than a normal person. I'm getting to know more and new people all the time. And well, it can be exhausting. I am kind of exhausted because I'm I like my peace. I like to be alone and just thinking in a room. COVID came and I realized my life hasn't really changed after the first 2 or 3 weeks. And then I switched on that as well, because once I could actually go out, I'm now making a conscious effort to find people and communicate with them.
Well, okay. Do you want to share? I want to be mindful of your time, but do you want to share at least one more strategy that you have in the book?
I can still continue. I can still continue from the last one.
Okay.
This same problem can also happen in another way. For instance, let's say you're a musician, again, same example, and as you learn to play some songs, the natural tendency is that you start to fill up your practice session with going over the things that you kind of already learned and can do, and where you aren't really pushing your skill as much anymore. And this process of going through and adding to your routine more and more things that you already kind of can do, it really happens gradually. And what happens is that you start leaving anything new that actually would push you, usually right there to the very end of your practice session. And as you do that more and more, as you fill up your practice session with the things and start with the things you already can do and it's part of your routine, the priority slowly changes from pushing your skill to practicing your routines instead. And if you ask some people, where do they put the new stuff in their practice sessions? Is it the beginning, the middle, or the end? Most people would say that the best time to practice something new would be at the end of your practice session, right? But what's their explanation behind it? What's the general person's explanation behind it? And usually the answer is that you need to go through your routine skills, not only to maybe warm up, but build up the difficulty systematically. And the second reason might be that you need to practice your routine moves to not lose them skill-wise, so to speak. And once you kind of got that done in your practice session, then perhaps you can move on to something more advanced. But what they don't take into account at all is their energy and focus level. Because what ends up happening is by the time you get to the new stuff, which you've put to the very end of your practice session, you have already used up most of your quality energy and focus. Understand that at the beginning, we have what we would call quality energy, which is, I believe, full of focus and activity. And I believe that's the kind of energy that you really need in order to overcome your current limits and your current skill level. But obviously, as you go towards the end of your practice session, it becomes energy that it's neither focused nor active. It's still usable, but usually there's not much focus left in it. It's just a kind of a tired state, far from what you would need for effective progress. In which case, the question becomes, why are we usually trying to accomplish something new that overcomes our current skill level, even when we would be full of energy, at a time when we are even in a worse state than when we started out? We usually decide to put our new, most demanding kind of things that is new to us and which overcomes our skill, usually right there to the very end. And so we literally try to reach something that is hard even when we are full of energy, at a time when we are in a worse shape than when we started out.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's like simple logic.
Right.
But this strategy, it's exactly the opposite of what naturals do, because naturals always keep the priority on the new stuff and start with it as soon as they can in their practice session. They warm up as fast as it's safe and possible, get ready, and start with a new thing that isn't comfortable. And once they get better at that, then they usually go back to their routine to perfect them, but coming from the most difficult thing down to the easier ones gradually. And this way, by coming from a high difficulty and something harder, going back to something easier becomes almost like effortless, because it syncs with their energy level.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, as physical energy gets burned and drops, the tricks or moves get easier and easier, instead the other way around, how everybody else does it, which is as energy gets lower, the things they practice usually get harder and harder. So the priority always stays with pushing yourself to new limits. And the reason people get stuck is when the routine becomes the priority in your practice, instead pushing your skill. So that's when you get stuck. And if you would do nothing else, but just put your most demanding new thing right as close to the beginning of your practice session as soon as you can, and there's obviously a bit more to this other than that.
Sure.
I mean, this is just barely scratching, like one technique out of 21. So we don't really have the time to get into it in this podcast. But if you just do that one thing, I can promise anyone that your progress results will change dramatically.
Yeah.
And for me, this little change not only shaves off years, it's actually the thing that made it possible for me to even reach the levels I was able to reach, thanks to it.
Yeah, it is, and it is so simple because I didn't realize that I kept plateauing with guitar, because, as you said, like the routine becomes a priority, and the more you learn, the bigger your routine gets. So all of a sudden, I'm just reviewing now like 15 songs and 10 scales before I'm like, okay, now I'm going to try something new. Yes. And it's like kicking the can down the road, and it's like further and further away where you get to the new thing. It's so simple, and once you speak to it, it's like, oh, duh. But left to my own devices, I'll sit there and say, okay, I'm going to review all my songs, I'm going to review all my scales. Now let's try something new. And what you described is exactly what my experience with guitar has been for the past year. It was like mind blowing. Right. So obvious too. So I love this. It's awesome.
Great. And if we track back to the question of, is mindset important? If you think about it, and I thought about this a lot, what's the real difference between a natural and a non-natural? Like, what's the ultimate root cause that makes them make these different choices? And it all comes down to self-esteem and confidence. They are not afraid to lose something in order to go for the new. So yes. Is mindset important? Of course it is. But you have to lead people into it first by letting them imitate the actions physically that already will kind of get them a result. And by getting the result, they get a taste for the confidence that it takes. And then it creates a loop where they can actually build that confidence and build that self-esteem and realize that they are no different than any talented person there is.
Yes. So good.
The root creates the fruits, right?
I love that. I love that. Well, you did ask a question. How does one occur to themselves? How do you occur to yourself?
Yes.
How would you say a natural occurs to themselves?
It's a positive delusion.
Amen. That's incredible. Yes.
It's, even if it isn't true, they do believe they are the best.
Yeah.
They do believe they are the best. And even if it isn't true, it creates the best chance for success for them.
Yeah.
You can know what's the truth. But if I need to choose in a situation, for instance, I had a circus festival, and everybody who matters in the business looks at you, and even though you had like a 20-year-old career, in one show you can ruin it. You have a bad day, let's say.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do against having a bad day except just blindly believing in yourself and really believing. It's not like convincing. I don't mean convincing. I am the best. I am the best. No, you really have to work on your self-image, believe that you are the best and you're going to do a good job. Because what's interesting with juggling, as soon as you think about dropping, you will. It's so instant. It's so, as said, because it's so micro level.
Yeah.
It's just the thought of making a mistake, and you lose. First of all, once you visualize, you see it in your mind that you made a mistake. It's not just words. It happens almost instantly. And the trick is not even having the thought come up. You only see yourself doing great, like from the beginning till the end. And when I first started training myself, like just visualizing, I sit in a corner and think about my complete act from the beginning till the end. I swear to God, I had problems of not thinking about dropping, even though I'm just visualizing. Right? So I had to train myself to think positively from the beginning till the end. And then a lot of other things come to play again, which is like, could be said it's mindset, but it's not really mindset, like focus training, where you don't lose your connection to your senses. Because if a thought comes up that you don't want, that's the moment you lose touch with your five senses, and that's the moment where dropping gonna happen. So a lot of simple, focusing on breathing. I actually do it with, again, how it's called. It's like a bracelet with little balls on it. And I set a timer for about 10 minutes and I focus on my breathing, which is a very mundane, very boring thought that you can only think about if you choose to think about and you choose to keep your focus on it. So I set the timer for 5 or 10 minutes. Depending, 5 minutes I need to do perfect. About 10 minutes gets you to perfect. So kind of,
I love it. Yes. Yep.
kind of that strategy is included in there. And every time I make a mistake where I forgot of focusing on breathing and some thought come up, I just automatically push one ball further, and there is a knot in a way where I know at the end how much mistakes I made. And
wow.
Once you start that exercise, you will realize that you are more and more focused during that.
Wow. So every time you notice yourself drifting into the thinking brain and away from present and away from the focused breathing, you mark that as a mistake. Yeah,
because it's a quick movement that doesn't take you really away.
Yeah.
It's like automatic and you are back at it immediately.
And so 5 minutes you can do with 0.
5 minutes is fine. 10 minutes, I kind of struggle, but that's more than enough for a performance. The active part of the act is 5 minutes. Take into account that I'm actually interested in what I'm doing during the act, which helps
Yes.
Because as said, it's very mundane to just focus on briefing. It's nothing interesting. It's incredibly, it can be at the beginning, let's say it like this. At the beginning, it's incredibly boring, but once you are present, there is no boringness. There is just presentness, and it even charges you.
Wow. Amen. That's beautiful. Man, this is so fascinating. Laido, I want to, I know you kind of said you talked about some things at the end when I asked my question, like when you learned all this, what happened in your career? What changed in your career? Where did that send you on a trajectory? When you learned all this, what happened in your career? What changed in your career? Where did that send you on a trajectory?
The illusion is that some people do make it. I wouldn't say I really got where I was planning to go. I realized where I planned to go ultimately and how I imagined it would be. That place doesn't even exist. But this online business did make me free to a degree and gave me an independence and a right for free speech I didn't have before.